Hi, I'm Rob Vanstone, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rider Rumblings video podcast. I am here, as always, with Sir Murray McCormick. We're going to discuss the Rough Riders' 30-16 victory over the Toronto Argonauts in, I think, the first 7:45 game that I can remember. And looking ahead to Friday's game in BC and sundry other matters pertaining to the Rough Riders, the CFL, what have you. Just off the top, Mur, what do you make of that game last Friday?
Well, that has to be the most impressive opening by the Rough Riders since they played BC the last time. When you watch that opening drive with Powell and the swing passes and the throws to Kean Schaefer-Baker, that one at the goal line and stuff, and a touchdown, it was almost reminiscent of that moment. Remember way back then in that August 5th game, Robin, we saw so many great things out of the Riders, and we thought, and of course, the Lions roared back to make it a much more exciting game. But what an opening statement for a team that has struggled offensively, has struggled so many things. It was just, I watched it a couple of times already, just appreciating the calls and everything. I know there's a whole game that take place after that. I'm not saying there wasn't impactful moments, but that drive just set the tone for this team that really needed something to get fans on their side, to get their confidence going again, and to show that William Powell can still play, and as we've seen Schaefer-Baker just do some amazing things. And then the touchdown run was just, the sneak was perfectly executed. Like, I don't know, Rob, that's what, is that wrong for me to stand out one series from a game like that that's so impactful?
No, I mean, I'm not sure that was the most important juncture of the game, but it certainly gave the Rough Riders a chance to make an emphatic statement right out of the gate. I would maintain that the game was decided in a couple of ways. First of all, the Rough Riders goal line stand late in the first half. Micah Teitz making a couple of huge plays. Read all about Micah Teitz in Wednesday's best-selling edition of the Leader Post. Tuesday's best-selling edition of the Leader. And then the Rough Riders moving the ball deep into Toronto territory and getting a field goal. So that's probably you presume the convert is made after the Argos score the touchdown. That's a 10-point swing. That's going into the locker room, so that's pretty crucial. Not only that, I think the Argos, I think conservatively you could say they left 100 yards in the field on plays where they barely missed, and where either the ball was dropped or the pass wasn't right there, and a play or two here and there, and it's a different game. Yeah, the Rough Riders won by 14 points, but there really wasn't a lot to separate those two teams. The difference was, I think the Rough Riders are more opportunistic, and as a result, they're 4-2.
And they showed some finish. In the last two games, they've been settling for field goals or missed field goals or whatnot, and they got down the field and they scored some touchdowns. So that's also pretty important. I know that after the goal line stand, which I'm not underestimating the impact of that goal line stand. The fact they didn't go offside was actually an accomplishment.
They tried, though.
They tried, but it was funny listening to Micah describe, what the coaches had worked on, how the corners now are looking in on the sides to make sure the guys aren't offside. So they've kind of addressed that issue. So it's nice, but we kept waiting for them to go offside. It was just that, well, they're going to go offside. They're going to go offside, and that would have changed everything. But that was huge. Micah Teitz is, as a guy we had questions about being the weak side linebacker. He's just stepped up to be one of those good Canadian guys. Is he Cameron Judge? I don't know. We'll have to see what happens at the end of the season, but he's playing pretty well right now.
If you look at what he's done statistically, Micah Teitz is certainly comparable to Cameron Judge. What we're not seeing are the highlight reel plays. We're not seeing something like Cameron Judge clobbering the quarterback in Montreal, the fumble being recovered and taking it back for a touchdown. We're not seeing the interception return for a touchdown like Cameron Judge had November 2nd of 2019 against Edmonton to provide insurance and pretty much nail down first place for the Rough Riders. We're not seeing those type of plays, but yet. But what we're seeing are the hard-nosed plays on 2nd and goal, 3rd and goal. What we're seeing are a couple of quarterback sacks. We're not seeing missed tackles. We're seeing reliability, and we're really not lamenting the departure of Cameron Judge. Nor is there a lament about the departure of Charleston Hughes. Yes, he had a sack on Friday against the Rough Riders, but that was not the type of sack that makes you rave about the pressure the quarterback is facing. That was a technicality of a sack. So, and the Rough Riders pass rush returned on on Friday against Toronto after a game or two of dormancy. So, Keon Adams had his best game as a Rough Rider. I think Micah Johnson had his best game as a Rough Rider. We saw Jonathan Woodard again.
Yeah. He got a sack too, Micah Johnson. So he's got his first sack of the season. I thought that was kind of a nice twist to see him. I also noticed at halftime that Micah Johnson went up and talked to Charleston Hughes before he went and jogged one of the. And I saw that's there's still respect there. They're still friends, and I think Micah Johnson. But Micah Johnson, I thought, did play very well, and I think, he's still injured and he's still got that. I guess still recovering from an ankle. I don't know if it's a high ankle sprain, but it still bothers him, and he was playing a lot better. And you got to give him credit for battling through injuries again. So with Micah Johnson, but we both know it's a different team coming up in BC.
One note about Micah Johnson, there was a play in the first half where Ricky Collins Jr. was wide open, and that should have been an 80-plus yard touchdown, and the ball was underthrown. Why was the ball underthrown? Micah Johnson won't get a stat for that play. He didn't get a sack. He didn't even lay a finger on the quarterback, but he applied enough pressure that his proximity to Nick Arbuckle altered the trajectory of the throw and the authority with which the throw could be delivered, and the throw ultimately fell short as a result, even though the receiver was wide open. And Micah Johnson isn't making life uncomfortable for the quarterback in that play. It's a touchdown. And again, it's one of those plays I referenced earlier that has a huge bearing on the outcome. And that's something that isn't even going to be reflected statistically, but it's I think it exemplifies the type of game Micah Johnson had, and that's what they need for him. That's what they paid handsomely for 2 years ago and got in spurts. And I think they're getting more from him now for a lesser wage than they did in 2019.
Yeah, I would say I agree with you on that. It's good playing. But how about, what do you think of Nick Arbuckle? Did he show that he's worth it?
I like Nick Arbuckle. I think he needed some help from his receivers from time to time. There were some times that he could have helped his receivers out. He was reputed to be a guy who wasn't really that aggressive going deep, but we certainly saw him refute that perception on Saturday, on Friday. There were so many plays over the top that they tried, and they succeeded on many of them. He was over 300 yards and made some nice throws. Wouldn't he look good in Ottawa right now as they go through that quarterbacking mess? And then they had the rights to him at one point. So and Nick Arbuckle, remember, came into Regina 2 years ago in place of Bo Levi Mitchell and lit up the Rough Riders secondary, and the Rough Riders ended up 1-3 after Nick Arbuckle tore him up. And after that, the Riders went on a roll, but they never did beat Calgary in 2019 while finishing first. And that's still, I think, a hurdle that this team is going to have to overcome. Yes, the Stampeders aren't what they were, but the Rough Riders under this regime have yet to show that they can beat the team that perennially is one of the major obstacles to finishing first in the West or advancing to the Grey Cup. That's the Calgary Stampeders. So we'll know very soon how they stack up against Calgary, with 3 games against the Stampeders and 2 of them in Calgary. So in the meantime, and I'm surprised there's not more hype about this. Maybe it will build up later in the week, but the Rough Riders are 4-2 and the BC Lions are 4-2. And the Riders are going into BC for a game Friday night. So that's a pretty pivotal game in terms of trying to secure a home playoff game, in terms of trying to make the playoffs for that matter, because even though the Riders are 4-2, they've got such a concentration of road games down the stretch that they've got to win, I think, under more challenging conditions than they've faced so far. So this is a pretty substantial football game coming up on Friday night, and then we start talking about Calgary with more focus.
I think Calgary looks eminently beatable after watching Bo Levi Mitchell struggling, which is, there's not a lot of patience, but I think Bo Levi struggling is just something that happened that one game. I think he's going to bounce back, but I still think the Stampeders are showing a little bit of, they're beatable now. Now, BC, look who's hot, eh? Look who started off so slowly, and Michael Riley started off slowly in that first game back then. They were down, I think it was 32 I meant to write that down. Was it
31-0?
31-0, somewhere in that neighborhood. And Riley was just wasn't, but he counts back. So, and who's the performer of the week for the 3rd time in this CFL? It's Michael Riley. He is back with a strong arm, and even when he makes bad plays, he bounces back. He doesn't let it bother him. He's always so I think they're going to see a different Michael Riley than maybe had played way back in the beginning of the season. So I do think the Lions are, and the Lions also can throw another guy, Lucky Whitehead, who's probably the most explosive player in the league right now. He's
And
just
they've got
fun to
Brian
watch.
Burnham.
Brian
who's,
Burnham. And
you
Brian
know, I
Burnham
mean,
didn't do much the last game, but Lucky Whitehead filled in so much. But
yeah, I mean, Lucky Whitehead is certainly he's kind of what Brandon Banks used to be as far as a player who can tear apart a game. There aren't a lot of players who are really scintillating to watch this year. There's not a lot of explosiveness in the Canadian Football League, period. If you want explosiveness, you're probably going to watch the National Football League or the NCAA. But I think Lucky Whitehead is one of the outliers this season, and then he's a player who's really torching defenses. And the Rough Riders are going to have to pay a lot of attention to him. There's Burnham. It's a pretty solid offense overall, and the Rough Riders under this regime haven't seen Mike Riley under these conditions. The first game of the year, his arm was Michael. First game of the year, his arm was linguini, and 2 years ago they couldn't protect him. So now you're seeing Mike Riley, who's getting some time to throw and has the arm strength to throw. And this is going to be a pretty formidable challenge the Rough Riders are facing.
Plus, they've been on the road once, and they got manhandled. So what did they do to recover from that? And I know it's different to compare it to the Bombers, because the Bombers they're just right now in a different league than the rest of the CFL. But I still think that they've only gone on the road once, and it's life. You go on the road, you go on the road. You got to play half your games on the road anyway. You should be able to be decent.
Yeah, now it's 75% of them.
Yeah, it's just such a strange number to see that, and it's still, it's what it is. COVID's brought is what it is, but it is kind of strange to see this such a heavy contingent of road games, and all against. Well, I was just looking at and they're all against West Division teams, I think, except for one or a couple.
They go to Hamilton, they go to Montreal.
Yeah, Hamilton and Montreal, but it's still, you got to do it in the West, and if they're going to make the play, you kind of said if they make the playoffs, are we at that point now? Or are we still they're going to make the playoffs?
Well, they're 4-2, but they've got 6 out of their final 8 on the road. And I wouldn't bet, and Calgary can certainly elevate itself in the standings with those 3 games against Saskatchewan. Those are going to be pivotal. Edmonton without Trevor Harris could really descend. I think you're talking about a number 5 team there now. I still can't name the quarterback with Chad Taylor. I can't remember who started. We'll consider Lemmerman this week. Yeah. So.
Maybe they should give Darian Durant a call. Give Darian Durant a call.
That's an interesting situation in Edmonton, because they've got tons of great receivers, but really nobody to get them the ball anymore. Exactly. So, and they've got a terrific running back, and it's still not doing them a lot of good right now.
The Riders have a running back, Rob.
They do.
Look at that, eh? William Powell was looking like William Powell.
And
just elusiveness and strength and power and speed and emotion, and just it was fun to watch him run the ball. And he did get 100 yards, which is always that magnet with standard that people set. But boy, he had some great runs.
And some swing passes. He did in Winnipeg too, and but that effort was largely wasted. The Rough Riders, I think, were as cognizant of the need to run the ball this past week as they were the week before in Edmonton. It just the nature of the game didn't take them out of running the ball in the second half, and they were able to keep plugging away. And their 2 longest gains of the day were on the ground: 33-yard run by William Powell, 25-yard run by Cody Fajardo. They had a 24-yard touchdown by Keon Schaefer-Baker. That was 24 or 25 yards after the catch. Yeah. They really still haven't really shown that there's a inclination to or a capability of throwing the ball downfield.
No, I haven't seen that yet. Hey, just to mention that Keon Schaefer-Baker and Nick Dembski probably had 2 of the best runs of the weekend.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
They just 2 that make you watch over and over again.
Yeah, pick your play of the week. How do you choose between those 2?
I was kind of watching Monday Night Football last night, and I thought maybe Chris Berman might have come up north to show off one of those things. But the one about Schaefer-Baker, and I think it was a team touchdown. I know we look at him getting all the attention because but you look at the blocking and the stuff, and it opened up the holes in his power and stuff. So it was a team touchdown, I think. Not saying they aren't, but it just Schaefer-Baker's getting all the credit, and deservedly so. But the Riders also had the blocking and the call, little 2-yard pass, and boom, this young guy it goes off Dan Clark's butt and stuff. And it was just a great play by Schaefer-Baker, who we've written about now, and I was trying to look back on it. There's not a whole lot of background. He didn't get garner a lot of attention in college. He really didn't. Just he played for Guelph, which was kind of a, I don't know if they're a good team or they just maybe a middle of the road team. Didn't really have the kind of quarterback in that Weston and Laval and the big schools get and Calgary gets. So he doesn't get all those passing attempts. But if people look on YouTube, you can see a one-handed grab he does against Ottawa in 2018 that is just spectacular. Like he just skies and brings it. It's like a Beckham type reception that happened with the New York Giants. Just an amazing play. So he's kind of generating some attention, and rightfully so. And he's a big, strong guy, and he's playing because Shaq Evans is hurt and Jordan Williams-Lambert is hurt. But that's not usually a Canadian position, that boundary wide receiver. It's usually an American, and it's good to see that he may be making the Riders have to make a decision, whatever happens. If it is a decision, maybe not. I think you go with Shaq no matter what. But I think he's throwing the Riders have a Canadian.
I think if you put Shaq back in that position, I think you find another position for Keon Schaefer-Baker. You can't take him out of the lineup now. Mm-hmm. Maybe that becomes a position that they would ordinarily bestow upon Jordan Williams-Lambert, who really hasn't shown much since he returned to the Rough Riders in 2019. You can't take Schaefer-Baker out of the lineup. There's also the ratio benefits to be derived, but the ratio doesn't really apply here. He's just good. Yeah. And good might be an understatement, and he's only going to get better. So you can't take him out of the lineup. That would be absolute folly. I think there's
Vic Roberts out of the lineup, eh?
I don't get that one. And I asked Greg Dickinson about it on Monday, and he explained that Ricardo Lewis is where the quarterback expects him to be, and that he's a good blocker and all that. But the primary responsibility for a receiver is to catch the football, and they've thrown 11 passes to Ricardo Lewis, and over 3 games, and 4 of them have been caught. A couple of them should have been caught. And they threw 4 passes to Paul McRoberts against Ottawa on August 21st. He caught all 4 of them. So Paul McRoberts has as many receptions in his last 2 quarters as Ricardo Lewis does in his last 12. I just don't see why there's a case for maintaining the status quo here, other than they just won with that lineup. But they also lost the first 2 games in which they played Ricardo Lewis. Not that he's to blame for it, and that wasn't that didn't really prompt any change. I don't know what they're seeing there. This pretty much guarantees that he gets 12 receptions for 213 yards on Friday night BC. But you know what? Why not try to get the guy involved in the offense too? They love their bubble screens, etc. Why not throw a few footballs to him and get him in the groove? I mean, it's not only he's playing an inside receiver position, so it's not like they've got him out in the wide side in a different postal code. Why not get him involved in the offense and see what he can do and get him in a groove? He's got some athleticism. They like what he can do. He gives them some speed that they generally don't have in that receiving core. Why not try to incorporate him into the offense and then see if he can play? I'm not sure that the way they've called the plays has been entirely fair to him either. But when his number has been called, aside from that first pass that was thrown to him in his first game, where he made a nice grab over the middle for 22 yards. Aside from that, there really hasn't been any reason to discuss him except for plays that should have been made or a pass interference penalty that should have been called.
Yeah, I agree with you. So, and we keep asking about Rick Robertson. I don't think Craig Dickinson is being coy. He's just providing the answers what they're doing, and we don't see it. So I guess maybe they see something we don't see. Maybe there's something going on in practice, but I don't see him being utilized in practice any more than he is now.
I mean, if there's anything that Paul McRoberts had done non-football related that resulted in him in not playing, then I just don't think he'd be here anymore. I mean, he's still practicing with the team. So if it was a disciplinary issue, why would he still be on the practice roster?
It's gone long past a disciplinary issue too.
Yeah, right? I mean, that would I think come out in the wash a lot earlier than disciplinary issues. Let's talk about AC Leonard.
Oh boy, yeah.
We're recording this on a Tuesday morning. It's 10:35 a.m. and AC Leonard has resumed practicing with the Rough Riders, and he is to speak with the media later on today. So by the time this is disseminated, AC Leonard will likely have spoken. So we're operating a little bit blind here, but they've based Craig Dickinson said on Monday they forgive AC Leonard. They don't condone what he did, but I think the general vibe that is coming out of the Rider organization regarding him is that he suffered enough. He got a 2-game suspension, and then a 1-game suspension was appended to that for comments toward the doping control official that were not well received, shall we say. My contention is that the Rough Riders should attack a game onto it. To me, that looks like a code of conduct violation. Craig Dickinson acknowledged that AC Leonard was, to quote Craig Dickinson, a jerk to the doping control officer. And that's not the way the Rough Riders generally comport themselves. And I think an example needs to be set here. I don't think they need to be draconian about it, but I would tack on another game just to make it clear that that kind of conduct is not acceptable from AC Leonard or from anybody else. Because this is an organization that prides itself on the manner in which it's perceived and the manner in which it conducts itself. And I don't think saying whatever was said to that doping control officer is a way that the Rough Riders would want to be represented. And I think the code of conduct should apply here.
I think it does. One thing you have to know is too, Robin, adding into the penalty, he's already got one strike against him for a drug test because he didn't take the test. So he's already one of the 3 strikes. Because that counts as a positive test by not being able to fulfill his duties. He's also going to be facing multiple testing times, more than other guys, because they know about him and somehow in the random world. So are the penalties still coming from this that he's going to have to deal with every day? But I kind of lean towards he's done enough. And I know it's part of the code of conduct. It's been taken out of their hands, but he's lost about $33,000 in salary. He's lost credibility. He's lost reputation. He's lost so much. When is enough? And I kind of think putting another game on there would be piling on a little bit. And I think if he's remorseful today, and he shows to me that he was a jerk and he had one of those moments, I think maybe he's done enough and he can move on and leave it behind him now. But I just think maybe one more game might be just too much for what this guy has gone through right now. And I'm not condoning anything he did. Absolutely no reason. There's no reason for the way he acted towards the doping control. And that's even bigger than the failing to pee, and a lot comparable to failing to pee in my mind. Like, these guys are just people out there doing their jobs. They're not trying to make him do anything. And I think the way he acted to that deserves some sort of reprimand. But
that's why you have a code of conduct. Why have a code of conduct if it's not going to be enforced in this case?
Well,
it's just words on a page or words on a website if the Rough Riders don't mete out some form of supplementary discipline.
Yeah, but you and I both listened to Craig on Friday night and Monday.
That's not coming.
It's not coming, and I think Craig is. If it was warranted, I think Craig would do it. I don't think he's the type of guy that's just not doing it because it's a leading pass rusher, which I hope doesn't come into play.
Well, let's be serious though. If he was a marginal player, he probably would be somewhere in the United States right now.
Yeah.
I mean, you give yourself a lot of leeway when you're the team's best pass rusher. And I don't think for a minute that isn't being factored in, especially when you consider it's a shortened regular season and suddenly missing a player of that magnitude for a game is quite a big deal, or a bigger deal, especially when you consider that if they add on a game to it, it would be a game against the Calgary Stampeders. But I think the Riders should stand for more than that. I think the caliber of a player or the importance of a game should be secondary here to the reputation of an organization that always strives to uphold its brand and have the brand portrayed in the most positive manner. And that what happened did not reflect well upon the brand of the team. And I think that's what has to be the larger consideration here. But I think we could chase our tails on that for forever. I'm right and you're wrong. Next topic. I'd like to talk a bit about junior football right now.
Sure.
That Regina Thunder Saskatoon Hilltops game on Saturday was an absolute classic. And I think we can wind the CFL into this as well, because the last 2 Thunder Hilltops games have been better than I think anything the CFL has put on the field this year. So yeah, this junior football exhibition of greatness on Saturday night was amazing, but why has the CFL been so boring this year? And then I think it also becomes topical when you watch a lot of the NFL games that have been played. And yeah, there are more NFL games, so there's more opportunities for there to be good ones. But people are raving about some of the NFL games, such as Kansas City and Baltimore. Very few of the CFL games this season have led people to ooh and ah. And I think that's a pretty substantial issue facing this league. It's just not that entertaining anymore. It sure beats watching bowling and televised poker, but and golf. Sorry, but it's not that entertaining anymore. What happened to the CFL that used to be so wide open and fun?
I still think and it seems kind of crazy to be 6 games into this 14 game season. I still think people are still adjusting from the year off. I still think that they haven't caught up to that number yet. And I do admit, you're right. Like, I hate to admit it, I fall asleep during a lot of CFL games.
So did the officials. You're not alone.
No, so did officials. But I think
the Thunder and the Hilltops had a year off, and they're playing great football. So,
yeah,
that game on Saturday was the best football game that has been played at Mosaic Stadium since it opened, the new one. Now, there may have been a high school game or two that I've missed that have been tremendous, and I'll always consider the 1993 Regina Intercollegiate Football League Schwann Conference Final between the Riffle Royals and Tom Trojans as one of the absolute greatest football games ever played anywhere. So there may have been a high school football game played at Mosaic Stadium that's of that caliber, but of games that I've attended or watched, that Thunder Rams game was so good, with so many storylines and so much passion. And this province would be so proud to have those two football teams. And although the Thunder won both games against the Hilltops, both of them could have gone either way. And they'll meet again in the PFC final, barring shocking development. That final will almost certainly be at Mosaic Stadium, and you don't want to miss that one.
Yeah, it'd be nice if there's a big crowd on hand for that one, unlike what we had on Friday night when the Riders were there.
Oh, boy. Yeah. How many people do you think were there? Jamie Noy is calculated it at 1,700 and 17,000. I think that's a pretty fair estimate, although we'll never find out because the CFL doesn't tell us these things.
It is just, I hadn't seen, someone said, what do you think? I says, I haven't seen Mosaic Stadium that empty since a practice. And it kind of looked up because I was busy working on something else before the game kicked off. And then I started to look around, and because the lights were out, the lights out were happening. You weren't quite aware of how many empty seats they were. You kept looking up, and I wish I could say it's because of COVID. It's because of the vaccination program. It's because of the boring CFL. It's because of its Toronto. But it's probably all of those things that came together. And, the Riders introduced their vaccination in Rider Nation. And I think it went really well. I don't think there were any issues with it. People got in. There were some protests, but we missed that part of it. But that's life.
Yeah, 10 of them. Boy, what a formidable group that is.
Yeah, okay, I'm going to protest.
That's going to influence public opinion.
So the Riders, looking back on that game, as it says, the Riders deserve credit for everything being handled really well. There wasn't, the lineups moved quickly. People got there early. Some people were mumbling about, I got here early for this. Well, if you hadn't got there early, you might have missed something. So
you got to get there early if you plan to take the elevator, because that'll get you there about halftime.
What else are we going to do on Friday night at 7:00 if you're going to a football game? Why not go at 6:30? Why not go at 5 and see? It's just different walking up to the stadium and not seeing people milling around outside as much. No party in the park. And it's just, you look around and can business like be the word? Because they're going to watch a football game. There's not the party that's generated. And I think maybe it happens more once you're in the stadium, but there's none of that stuff outside the stadium. I think maybe they're missing a bit of that kind of world.
It's pretty sterile outside the stadium. But yeah, I agree with you. I think there's a lot of factors. It's a confluence of factors. It's been a heavy concentration of home games.
Yes.
So I think that has an effect on the pocketbook, although they didn't even reach their season ticket total with attendance, which those are bought tickets where people are staying away. And there's at least 5,000 or 6,000 people who bought tickets that didn't go. So what is their disinclination to go if they've already paid that money? You would think it's got to be the vaccination issue, but good for them for doing it. Good for the Rough Riders for looking at something bigger than their pocketbook or their bank account at a time when their finances have been threatened, and still making the right call, belatedly but still effectively. So, and a call that our fearless leaders in the province weren't inclined to make. The Rough Riders had to go out on a limb there, and I'm sure they encountered some resistance, and I'm sure there have been some messages left at Mosaic Stadium that people didn't enjoy listening to. But they made the right call in some way to their detriment. But now that their fans are as safe as they can be, and I think that's an important consideration, especially as we look at numbers that are routinely flirting with, if not exceeding 500 in terms of COVID cases per day.
think a Friday night game had much to do with it too. I heard some people saying they didn't really like the Friday night game. Weird time, still kind of head scratching time.
7:45?
Yeah, but the Riders tried to play it up at the lights out show, and I didn't really notice it looked all right to me. It didn't. Did you notice it much?
Yeah, what was all the fuss about?
Yeah, you kept telling us going to turn off the press box lights, and they didn't turn off the press box lights because I guess they can't. I'm not quite sure.
They used to have lights out shows at Taylor Field, but they weren't planned.
Yeah.
But the element of unpredictability made them memorable.
Yeah, but it was a loud crowd, I guess. It's hard to tell as I keep referring to the press box as our aquarium.
Yeah.
If you don't open, you can't hear what's going on out there. You can't really tell. We're kind of tucked away in a corner and it compares to me is that when I go and cover the Blue Bombers for the Banjo Bowl, it's outside. The windows are open and it's loud. And from my experience, that's what makes them the loudest crowd. Is I usually leave there with a pretty bad headache after listening to Bomber fans cheer on their teams.
I got a bit of a feel for it because I do a halftime segment for every home game on CKRM with Mitchell Blair. So I had to get to the broadcast booth a minute or two before halftime to make sure I'm there on time. So Derek Taylor and Luke Molander and spotter John Hoffman have an open window there. And that just so happened to be at the time when the Rough Riders are moving down the field after the goal line stand against Toronto. And even though the Riders offense had the ball, that was a pretty robust crowd. And when there were a series of first downs, that crowd was notable in terms of the decibel level it produced. So, yeah, 17,000 is still louder than 17,000 would be elsewhere, but it's still.
I don't think it reflects a lack of interest. I don't think it reflects a lack of interest in the Riders. I bet you the other 13,000 people that bring them up to 30 are home watching it on TV. They're not disinterested in the Riders. I just think there is some reason this game, Toronto's a tough sell. It's always been Jim Hobson said Toronto is one of their toughest sells for some reason. And you would think it'd be the rivalry of the little town that could against the big city Toronto people, but Toronto just has a hard time drawing fans here. And it's not always been that way, but I don't remember a whole lot of big crowds for Toronto games. So
there's only 7, maybe 8 opportunities to watch this team in person this year. Yeah. In Saskatchewan this year. And there weren't any last year. And it's a good football team, a very good football team. What are people waiting for? So
I think you nailed it. It's a lot of home games in a row. We coming off of a challenging economic year. I think we're safe to say the farmers have been struggled and stuff. So maybe people just don't have that money. Maybe they're like us, we're looking down the road, I want to go to Mexico. I want to go someplace in the winter. I got to save a little bit of money. Maybe. I don't know. We're trying to make up reasons for maybe the Riders.
I mean, it could be very well be all of the above. There's just so many factors to consider. One thing I want to discuss, Ian Duffy asked a really good question. Ian Duffy of Global Regina asked a question of Cody Fajardo after Friday's game about what it's like to deal with self-doubt, and that was in response to something Cody had said earlier in the Zoom call about some of the comments he received via social media and his consequent disinclination to spend as much time on social media as he typically would. This is a player who's typically very active on social media and engaged in it or on it with fans, but he took a step back over that fortnight that did not go especially well for himself or the Rough Riders. And he said, basically, people sometimes forget that athletes are human beings and we have feelings. And it really was, I think, and I'm writing about this for Wednesday's paper, it really gives you pause to think about what you're saying, what you're putting on Twitter, what others are putting on Twitter. Professional athletes, especially quarterbacks, tend to default to quarterback speak and cliches and platitudes. And Cody Fajardo, to his immense credit, is not of that mindset. And he's genuine, he's honest. And one of the first times I can remember seeing a Rough Riders quarterback who was not afraid to demonstrate some vulnerability. And when talking about these things hurt. And I've probably written some things in print, put some things on Twitter over the years that have hurt people, that have not enhanced the day of some people. Maybe what we've been saying about Ricardo Lewis earlier, or AC Leonard falls into that category. So maybe there's some hypocrisy at work here too. But what did you make of Cody's comments, Mer?
I thought they kind of came out of the blue a little bit.
Yeah.
I just went, I was like, just go, well, what brought this on? And I don't know. Do you remember seeing a lot of criticisms on Twitter about him? Maybe I don't remember seeing.
I went looking through Cody's Twitter timeline, and I didn't see anything, but they may have been filtered out too. I don't understand the intricacies of what he can see that others can see, et cetera, et cetera. I didn't see anything derogatory, but Cody Fajardo is not going to invent things, and if he says that there were disgusting things said about him, I have no doubt that there were, and I find that in turn disgusting. Maybe not surprising because he is a quarterback at the Saskatchewan-Roughriders, and it's a very prominent position and one that's subject to a lot of scrutiny and a lot of criticism. And he shouldn't be absolved of that simply because he is a Rough Rider quarterback. But I think at some point you've got to take into consideration that this has happened too many times in Rider history. Ron Lancaster, Kent Austin, Kerry Joseph, Darian Durant, the 4 Grey Cup winning starting quarterbacks in Riders history, have all felt the wrath of the fans at some point in their time in Saskatchewan, some worse than others. The worst example being Ron Lancaster being booed in his final game as a player at Taylor Field on October 22nd, 1978. So do we want to go down that road again? This is a quarterback who's invested in Saskatchewan, who loves Saskatchewan, has signed on through the 2022 season, probably left some money on the table to do so. Maybe foregoing an NFL look-see in the process. And he had a bad game or two, and he's the first person to own that. But does that entitle people to absolutely unload on him? And does that just make you wonder if the people who are purportedly cheering for him are just front runners, or those who are just inclined to support him win or tie? And if there's a bad game or two, just forget about this guy. I was really disappointed that Cody Fajardo was in a situation where he felt compelled to lament the treatment he received on social media, because this is someone who's an absolute gem in addition to being a franchise quarterback. Guys like this don't come along very often. And I just think he deserved far better than that.
Yeah, as I said, I was surprised that I've been not as much as you. I've been subject to a few social media things back in the world. And I remember thinking, oh, isn't that kind of mean and stuff? And you just sort of suck it up and go on. But I can only imagine how Cody feels, and feeling he's done so much for this team, as much as he can, considering we lost this season. So yeah, I was still surprised to hear that people were doing it. But as I said, sometimes you got to have the thick skin to be a quarterback. Like even Calgary was booing Bo Levi in his struggles on the weekend. So it's not everyone's immune to being part of the criticism.
Derek Jeter got booed at Yankee Stadium. I mean,
how could you boo
Ron Lancaster got booed here? But
it's just honestly, different
it's such stupidity.
Social media gives all these people such an opportunity to be so critical and say these things from the safety of their keyboard that they would probably go, if they saw Cody in a restaurant or something, they'd go up and beg him for an autograph, the exact same folks, and interrupt his meal. So,
and we're sort of like that too, though. Like, for example, if I rip a coach, I'm probably not going to walk up to the coach before I rip him and say, that was a terrible decision, and what are you doing, and you should be fired. I'm just going to write that. And so I have an element of protection. And granted, it's my job to do that as a columnist, but I have an element of protection and an element of insulation because I sit behind a keyboard, and I do the same thing that a lot of other people would do on social media. The difference is, well, there's two differences. One, people know who I am, rightly or wrongly. If I have an opinion, my name is beside it. I'm not Moondog1222 on Twitter.
Or the egg.
Or the egg. And the other thing is, if I criticize somebody, granted, it's different in the Zoom world, but if I take somebody to task, I'm probably at practice the next day, and if they want to confront me about it, I'm right there. So that's the difference. In a lot of these cases, they're just anonymous organisms that are dispensing this, and for what purpose? So the Cody Fajardo, who's invested himself in this province and is so great to the fans, suddenly has reason to think, should I be that active on social media? Should I respond to somebody on Twitter? Yeah, there might be 9 nice comments, but if there's 2 idiots there, does that sour the entire experience? So I'm just going to push back and just just worry about being the quarterback of the Saskatchewan-Roughriders. And then what good does it do? Because you've taken a guy who's so engaged and so popular and so likable and so thoughtful, and just made him wary of interacting with the fans that by and large love him. But there's one in every crowd. There's probably 10 in every crowd.
But shouldn't it be allowed to criticize though? How do you do it? Is there I'm trying to think of the right word to describe a way to do a criticism, to criticize a guy without slapping them, without saying disgusting.
I'm not saying don't criticize them, but when it goes beyond that and people are saying disgusting things, I don't mind when people criticize what I write. I get mad when people criticize my dog. You
have a dog?
If people, she hasn't even made a cameo yet this week, but if people are going to criticize the substance of what is written, that's fair game. I just ask in return that I know who it is that's criticizing. Otherwise, they get muted or blocked, or whatever. But criticism is fair game. I'm the last person in the world who's going to say that people shouldn't criticize, because that's my job. I'm a columnist. But that's one thing. And Cody will be more critical of himself than others likely will be of him in many cases. Look after the Labor Day Classic, and he pretty much owned that result excessively and said that he let the Rider Nation down, let the fans down, etc. His teammates. Well, no, he played his heart out. There was nothing to be ashamed of that day. But he's going to be harsher on him toward himself than others are going to be. But suddenly, when you incorporate other elements into it, and that's clearly what happened to provoke the kind of emotional response that Cody Fajardo delivered to Ian's question, that's going too far. And how do you stop it? You can't, because Moondog1258 is going to have an opportunity to go on Twitter and take a pot shot at Cody Fajardo. And even if he gets blocked or muted, there'll be Moondog2287 doing the same thing. And that's the worry. And how does this get? How does this not get out of control without Fajardo pulling back and saying, I'm just not going to interact with people? And then one of the nicest people ever to play for the team, one of the people who's most inclined to deal with the fans, suddenly is repelled by that notion, or at least reluctant, and that's just unfortunate.
And then you go to look to see how many followers Moondogger has, and he has like 11 or 12. He might have 100. So he's basically entertaining his friends with his comments, but because Twitter's so out there, some guy with not many followers can have an impact on a guy like Cody who has thousands of followers.
Yeah, and
it's kind of a strange. The old days used to be, you could have that opinion with your guys on Coffee Row, and that's where it stayed. Now you don't even have to go to Coffee Row.
And it's not fun. But I mean, and I deal with it all the time. I mean, they're rare as a Rough Rider game where I don't have to block or mute somebody. And you generally have to go pretty far for me to respond that way. But I got about 12,800 followers. I think Cody's got about 14. So we probably have the same, somewhat the same experiences when we click on conversations on Twitter. And there's days that I know when I write something that I'm going to hear about it. And I recently had that experience with the vaccination issue, and I wrote numerous columns about that, and even allowed politics to enter into the equation, rightly or wrongly. So not only was I commenting on a matter of public health, and a controversial one at that, but I was straying into the area of politics where I do normally don't go there. So there were a lot of respondents from whom I would not ordinarily hear, and there were a few that did get personal, that did get stupid, and I will never hear from them again. There's one guy who keeps creating an account under a supposed real name, and I block him, and then he returns with the same name, and I block him again. He's been blocked more than the Argos were on the Keon Schaefer-Baker touchdown, but he keeps regenerating himself under the same name. He's like this Twitter cat with 9 lives, and I can't block him enough. And there's no way of filtering out those people who are just offensive. Disagree all you want. Tell me my column stinks. I'll agree with you sometimes, but just don't criticize my dog. Don't criticize me personally, unless I've done something to you that warrants the criticism, and then go nuts on it, etc. And that's where I think the line should be drawn. And we've both seen things that are over the top. I've got an infamous email that I saved. It was sent 15 years ago, and I still have it. because it was so vile that I thought I might have to go to the police over this. So I saved it, and it's still on my phone. I show it. It's one of those party tricks that I now show off. And look at this email I once got, and people go, "Ooh," right? And so, but you know what? That guy signed his name to it, so I responded to him. And I'm getting a bit tangential here, but you're going to get a lot more latitude if you actually put your name beside your opinion, even if it's absolutely ludicrous. At least you have the credibility to put your name beside it. And I would venture to say that most of the people who responded to Cody Fajardo either didn't put their name or were too gormless to even know their name. And that might be an issue as well.
Anyway, I think
I'm ranting. That's my rant for the week. Was that a good one?
We pounded this issue to the end. I think I'm looking forward to the BC game. A late kickoff, though. It's going to have to get a little nap in before we do another 8:30 kickoff. So that's going to be, I think it's 8:30. Let me double check. Yep, 8:30.
Yeah, 8:30
on TSN.
Why is it 8:15 or 8:45?
I don't know. Be interesting to see what kind of crowd they get in BC. It's normally an older crowd. It is an older crowd, and we'll see how they react. I think
there's such an old crowd that BC actually appears after their year that many of those fans were born. Sorry.
Anyway, I expect the Riders did they pick up momentum against the Argos, or was it just a little blip? We'll see what they do. See what they can garner against the BC Lions.
It'll be interesting because it's a crucial West Division game. Their West Division games to this point they've all had asterisks beside them. I mean, there were the 2 losses to Winnipeg. There was a season opening victory against BC. Do you look at the glass half full, the first half, or the glass half empty, the second half against BC?
So, on Twitter, it's half empty.
Yeah, I mean, nobody talks about the planes that land, so sometimes you're going to get I think more of a reaction to something that doesn't go well. For example, Riders lose back-to-back games against Winnipeg. Our inboxes are full. Riders beat Toronto rather convincingly. Don't get any responses at all.
Yep.
It seems to be a different response to winning than losing. Riders can win by 20. Nobody seems to be inclined to tweet or email. Riders lose by 20. Well, you can spend all day answering emails. We should sign off. You got to get to practice, and I got to go for a bike ride. It's a day off. So I'm going to read the outro, unless there's anything you'd like to add. And
no, I can't think of much.
This is my recitation,
outro.
My mandatory recitation. If you enjoy the take 2. If you enjoy the podcast, please leave a review and a 5-star rating. It helps us grow the podcast. You can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to send us a question, you can email Rob, that is me, at rvanstone@postmedia.com. That's rvanstone@postmedia.com, and we'll read it on the show. You can also follow me on Twitter at Rob Vanstone. Don't send any mean messages. And or Murray, send him mean messages if you want, at Murray LP. So thanks for your time. Sorry for being so ranty today, but I get going on these things, and it tends to extend a podcast longer than it should be. Murray?
Hey, send us a letter. It'll be your first one.
We need a letter. We need comments.
Yeah, if you get to the very end of this thing, send us a letter.
Yeah, and just if you want to be rude, put your name beside it, and we'll talk about it next week. For Murray McCormick, I am Moondog4468, and we'll talk to you next week. Take care.